Welcome back to another Perils in Paradise card review. Today we got a bunch of Shaman cards, we got some rainbow spell stuff, we got some evolve stuff, and we got some random stuff. But let's kick things off here with this new legendary and the Rainbow Spell School package. This is Karis Cabaret Star, a 5-mana 5/5 Naga, and it reads, while in your hand, play 2 different spell schools to transform. So basically, she is going to gain 2 different effects on a battle cry, depending on the spell schools you cast first. So, for instance, if you cast an arcane spell, she's going to gain an effect that says draw 2 cards. If you cast fire, deal 6. If you cast frost, freeze 3 random enemy minions. Nature, she's going to gain 2/2 and taunt. Holy, she's going to restore 6 health. Shadow will destroy 2 random enemy minions. And Fell, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. And it has been confirmed that she has some kind of logic determining the order of these casts, even if you do them in a different order. For instance, no matter what order you play a like Fell and Shadow spell in, she'll always cast the Fell one first to clean up like any small minions, and then cast Shadow to hopefully hit any bigger minions left behind. So there's just a little bit of logic dictating the order on these in a couple specific cases, which definitely can help. Now, as for the quality of these effects, I mean, I think for 5 mana, they're honestly pretty solid when paired together. The standouts for me are like deal 6 to the enemy hero. Of course, you know, extra lethality can always go pretty far, and deal 6 is really rather significant, getting a fireball or a Leroy on this. Arcane is drawing 2, you know, that's just like a good solid option. That's gonna work, it's gonna pay off for you. Now, realistically, the ones that are going to be most common, of course, in Shaman are Frost, Fire, and Nature, because in many cases, those are the things you'd naturally be running in your deck. If this is sitting in hand early, those are the 3 that are going to go off. I don't necessarily love the Nature, like just getting +2/+2 and taunt. That's not that meaningful. It's a pretty small buff. And Frost, very conditional, right? Some boards that won't feel meaningful at all. There might be some instances here and there, but having one that's like so specific to board states or even matchups can be kind of risky for one of the fundamental spell schools in Shaman. So I think, Fire, that's a good matchup. Like, that's a base spell for Shaman. That's a common spell school and a pretty good result. But some of the other ones I'm more excited about, like Arcane, is sometimes hard to get to in Shaman. But we are, of course, going to see some additional support for this, like Siren Song here. Get 2 random spells from spell schools you haven't cast this game, so that can get you into these other spell schools. Now, sadly, I think things like Holy are going to feel pretty weak. Like, restoring 6 is not a particularly valuable upside, and again, like Shadow could be really bad depending on the board state. They have a bunch of 1/1s that does nothing, might get your Karis here kind of stuck in hand a little bit. So I think a pretty mixed bag on the results. I think you're often going to end up with like one solid option and then maybe something that's not that good. There's also this problem of like you don't necessarily get to control it as such. Like, yes, of course you can sit on a spell and not cast a spell in order to protect your Karis to get like a better effect later, but sometimes you just have to play spells. You just need to do things like, this fits my curve, I need to play this frost spell right now. Well, that sucks. My Karis is going to get kind of a negative effect. So that's a little wacky for this one. Like, that just hurts the consistency a little bit. You can't get the results you always want out of this, and sometimes you're going to end up with a card that's rather awkward. And unfortunately, like, the best case scenarios I think are still just solid. Like, best case scenarios make this a reasonable card. I don't think they make it insane. So that range is not very favorable. It's going to range from kind of bad or stuck or, awkward to solid at best. And that can sometimes be a problem. I mean, it may be that a rainbow deck is just good enough that this is just a very natural fit, but I don't think this is going to feel like the reason to run a rainbow deck or the start of the show. And I do worry about the deck's kind of viability if this is sort of your big payoff card. I don't know that this does enough. It might need more help. Now, we are going to talk about another card that might get at that help, but also just a reminder too, we did have this one revealed previously, which I think this card is way more of a payoff for rainbow decks. The Cabaret Headliner, remember this was revealed earlier on. Also, the artwork is just like more beautiful to me, but they're both fine. Both pretty cool. But this one, reducing the cost of a spell of each school in your hand by 2, like that's some pretty substantial potential tempo gain, right? Like that's just a ton of mana saving. That's better than a 5-drop, perhaps, with just some, like, you know, awkward effects on occasion. So if this deck's going to make sense, I think it's maybe because of the headliner and perhaps our next card. And Karis is just sort of a tag-along of sorts, which is kind of funny for the legendary. Now, also, we should talk about Death Knight, of course, because Death Knight did get the Shaman Tourist buttons. We saw this card a long time ago as well. And this is another Rainbow Spell School support sort of card. Draw a spell of each spell school, which, you know, if you've got all these spell schools, then, you know, you might be wanting to run some of these support cards in Shaman. You could kind of double dip on this deck in both classes. I'm not 100% convinced that's going to be worth it. It's funny because, like, some of the support cards, like Siren Song here, which gets to these other spell schools, doesn't actually help with buttons because these are already going into your hand. They're not going into your deck or anything, so he's not going to be drawing any extra cards. So really, you're going to have to be running some base Shaman cards that offer you access to new spell schools, specifically from Perils in Paradise, of course, because the tourists can only grab cards from Perils in Paradise. And I'll just go through these. We have one new nature spell that doesn't look very good to me, so that's not a great reason for buttons to exist. We have a frost spell that doesn't look great to me. It's just kind of okay, I think. Again, and more importantly, Death Knight has access to tons of frost stuff already, so this one doesn't really help buttons either. And then we had the fire spell as well. I think I have that one pulled up over here somewhere else. Yeah, the Malted Magma. This one got revealed a long time ago as well. So this is like a fire spell for Death Knight. So you're basically getting, I think, an okay fire spell and a pretty bad nature spell that you're going to have access to for extra buttons synergy cards, which I'm afraid to say has left buttons a little stranded. Maybe the mini set could come along and give him access to something else, but it's probably just going to be fire and nature naturally in Shaman, and unfortunately that nature spell's bad. So without another like really good synergistic nature spell coming along, I don't know if buttons really make sense with the rest of this stuff. Anyway, Karis and this rainbow package seem okay in Shaman to me so far. We'll talk about it more, but Death Knight's pretty iffy, I'd say. So moving on here to the Razzle Dazzler. This is a 7-mana 4/4 Naga with Battle Cry. Summon a random 5-cost minion. Repeats for each spell school you've cast this game. And it's funny because they gave Shaman basically the exact same payoff, or one of the exact same payoffs that Rainbow Mage always had. They had, still do have, Elemental Inspiration, you'll recall. This guy here, which would be summoning you 4/5s for each spell school you've cost. And interestingly enough, the average stat line I saw on Twitter of a 5-cost minion is about 4/5. So this on average is also going to be summoning you 4/5s. Now the good news on this one is that it comes with one at base and it's a 4/4 itself. So you're getting a 4/4 and a bonus, a free kind of 5-cost at a base level. And then you scale from there. So you don't need quite as many spell schools to get this to a similar state as far as, like, you know, average stats on board. Now that said, I will say too, like, the Razzler Dazzler's results I think are going to be worse on average. Like, the fact that each of the elemental inspiration results came with a keyword meant that you knew you were getting something with upside. It wasn't just a pile of stats. You know, sometimes the Divine Shield, the Rush, Lifesteal, whatever would be nice and impactful, and you'd get, you know, often 2 or 3 of those that did something really good. With the Razzler Dazzler, I think sometimes you're just going to get, you know, a Battle Cry card with no additional upside, and it's just going to be that pile of stats. And, you know, sometimes, yes, you'll get a cool Death Rattle or Legendary or Chargeman or something that gives you some upside, but I think the range of results will be much worse and sometimes a little higher, whereas Elemental Inspiration kind of condensed those down to more average results. I mean, yes, sometimes a Taunt felt like it did anything, sometimes Rush feels like it doesn't do anything, but it's a tighter range, a tighter band of expectations, whereas this is that wider band of expectations, which can be good in some cases. You know, you have some crazy high rolls that could snowball a game in your favor, but there's also going to be those moments where this feels like it sort of whiffed and you didn't really get what you needed out of it. And I think this is really one of your big payoffs here for a Rainbow Spell School Shaman. So that does make me a little bit nervous. Now, I also, though, like that this starts out ahead. So it's probably going to be easier to just slam this on 7 and get like 4 or 5 bodies out of it pretty reasonably often. and it may not need as much support, which is thankful because I don't think Shaman has as much as Rainbow Mage, but it also kind of just starts out at that better level. So I would say in my mind this is kind of in a similar spot, all things considered, to Elemental Inspiration. When you sort of weigh all of those different factors, the question then becomes like, is the deck as viable as something like Rainbow Mage? And that makes me far more nervous. I don't see the win condition that Rainbow Mage always had, and I don't see the sort of breadth of spell school generation that Rainbow Mage had. So although this card itself seems like a similar or maybe even slightly better payoff, I do have some concerns about the deck overall. All right, so moving on here to Siren Song. This could be a way to fuel your spell school package. 2-mana spell, get 2 random spells from spell schools you haven't cast this game. And I mean, this is okay efficiency from a generation standpoint. I think the problem here is just the random results. Like, there's no sort of filtering on this at all, so you're just going to get 2 completely random things, often going to be completely useless in a given situation. Something that's like synergy driven sometimes, where it's just like, man, this is missing half of its upside or value because my deck just can't resolve this in a way that's meaningful. You know, sometimes super high cost, sometimes super low cost, low value. So you either get something that's like stuck in hand the whole game, or something that just didn't return any value on your 2-mana investment. And although, again, you know, this fuels your Razzle Dazzler and stuff, it's just like this whole package needs to be better, I think, in order to make itself compelling. I will also note that the Razzle Dazzler, since this comes with the stronger sort of baseline start, where it's already summoning a 5, it's a 4/4 itself, just the 3 natural Shaman spell schools kind of make this interesting, right? Like, you already get 5 minions as a result of that. So like adding some extra ones in, it doesn't necessarily feel that meaningful if you have to run bad cards and you have to play bad random cards, right? You're kind of committing extra here when maybe it's not all that meaningfully different. If this itself were like a shadow spell or something, and it said like Haunting Song and it was a shadow spell, and that netted you a spell school itself, that could help. We also saw too some confirmation on Reddit with this one that if you've like played 2 of these or something and you've gone through all the spell schools, if there's any you have, like, if you've already cast them all, this could basically generate you 0 cards. So in some ways this could actually be a totally dead card late in the game if you've somehow managed to cast all of the spell schools already. So it does actually look and say, hey, if you haven't cast these yet, there's no like buffer or safety net built in where it just gives you something random instead. It gives you 0 results, so it can actually fizzle as well. And as we mentioned for Death Knight, you know, this doesn't really synergize with the Death Knight Tourist either, because these aren't going into your deck. Doesn't add to the card draw efficiency of buttons in any way. So, you know, all of this together, it's like, I think Razzle Dazzler looks pretty solid, and honestly, maybe this card's actually still fine even with just like 3 given spell schools, which makes it kind of iffy in Death Knight because they generally only have the 2 in Frost and Shadow, but in Shaman, kind of interesting. I just don't see Siren Song helping. Moving on here to Natural Talent. This is another random generator, 3 mana, get a random Naga and a random spell. They cost 1 less. So this thankfully does give you a little bit of a discount, which feels helpful when you're getting random stuff, but still at the end of the day, man, these results are so broad. There's so many Naga now, it's like God knows what you're gonna get. Is it going to be helpful? Almost never is going to be like a really meaningful Naga. The random spell, you know, could be from a different spell school, but could also just be something that's completely bad and in a spell school you've used. So this doesn't really sing out to me in any sort of rainbow deck. It doesn't really make sense. It is a nature spell itself, which kind of gives it that edge in Death Knight Rainbow with buttons. Like, there's no other nature spells in Death Knight, so this could draw you an extra card off your buttons. But are you willing to run bad cards just for that? Because I think this card looks bad. I just don't see why anybody needs to play this. The cost discounts aren't going to make up the difference of having to pay the 3 up front on this and getting 2 very often just bad things. So moving on here, we've got ourselves a little Evolve package for Shaman, which I think has some bad cards, but also a really good one. I think this card's kind of insane. Carefree Cookie is a 3-mana 2/2 Murloc and Pirate. He is the Demon Hunter Taurus, so of course, you play this in your Shaman deck, you can run Demon Hunter cards, which could potentially be relevant, I think, for this guy. He reads, after friendly minion dies, summon a random minion that costs 1 more, which I think is nuts, because this lets Cookie potentially generate a ton of stats on board for only 3 mana. Like, basically, anytime you stick a little board, even just 2 or 3 minions that stuck, and you're willing to trade them in because, you know, you just want to clean up your opponent's board, tidy up or whatever, which is not an altogether unusual board state in Hearthstone. Like, we have a lot of little minion-based decks jostling for that early kind of tempo lead or advantage. Or, you know, sometimes you get out ahead and your opponent slams like a big taunt or whatever, and you want to trade a few small things in. Anytime you do that with Cookie on board, you're just getting a ridiculous amount of stats back. If you have like a couple 3-drops and a 2-drop, right? You trade all those in, Cookie's going to leave you with 2 4-drops and a 3-drop left behind, and he's just generating those out of thin air. It's not like most evolve effects where you're taking a minion that already exists and just making it a little bigger. Sometimes that feels like a buff almost, in essence, right? This is generating them brand new and making them bigger. So you're still getting the upside of the full initial stats of the minion that died, and then a total refresh on new stats, and it's still bigger as well. So to me, like, this is just a way to leverage some crazy swings early in a game. You know, like, it works with Murlocs, Pirates, Totems, any kind of tempo deck or stat line. We've already seen Patches the Pilot and Demon Hunter with the little charging tokens. So, like, you know, play a Patches the Pilot, get a couple Pirates summoned out of your deck, slam a Cookie, trade those in, get some free 2-drops, right? There's also just generalized rush minions, and also rush minions can do some cool things with chains where you like trade in a minion, it turns into a new rush minion, you trade in that minion, it could turn into a rush minion again. There's so many rush minions, that's not that obscene to think about. And just like create a chain of deaths and new summons off your Cookie. You can also do that behind taunts, like hide this behind a taunt, your opponent pushes through the taunt, they clear it, and Cookie summons a new taunt if they can't like snipe this from behind the taunt because they're like a minion trading sort of deck. So those are the more ridiculous results, but I don't think you need those for this to be crazy. I think it's just really good sometimes. Trading in any given board. You could also just play this all at once with rush minions of your own. You don't have to, you know, play it into a board that was already leveraged. The one risk, of course, for this sort of card is that if you're way ahead and your opponent doesn't have anything to trade into, this can be kind of a dead card in hand. That's a good problem to have, but it does mean like super aggressive, more, you know, decks that are trying to push face a lot and maybe not looking to trade as often might not have as many use cases for Cookie. But I think this is just pretty darn cheap at 3, and there will be a lot of instances where this feels really good to play. And you may not even need like 3 or 4 things to make it feel worth it. Sometimes you just like have a 5-mana 5/5 on board, you want to trade into your opponent's 5-mana 5/5, and Cookie basically lets you generate a random 6-drop for only 3 mana with, you know, some additional potential later in the game too if it somehow survives or creates awkwardness for the opponent. So to me, I think a really, really nice little card. Some really game-winning tempo swing potential early, and probably surprising amount of utility late too. Even you don't have to hit home runs off this to make it feel worth it for 3. So this looks really good. Now moving on to another evolve card. This one does not look really good to me. This is matching outfits at 4 mana. This one allows you to transform a minion into a random one that costs 1 more and then summon a copy of it. And yeah, I'm sure there are some like crazy high rolls off of this that are possible. You can cook up some mana costs where this feels like it's cheating into some ridiculous results, and you get like free 8/8s or whatever out of it. Well, not free, they cost 4 mana, but you get the idea. A better than expected result is possible. But I will say, when it comes to evolve cards, the more evolve targets you have, I think generally the better the evolve card has been historically. Also, a lot of the best evolve cards have been much cheaper as well. You know, 1 mana evolving your entire board. That allows you to sort of level out your results. If you have like 5 targets, you know, it's okay if 1 low rolls or whatever, because you have 4 other targets to even things out, and you maybe get a high roll, low roll, and kind of a mixed result in the middle there, you know. But when you're going all in on a single evolve and spending 4 mana to do it, low rolls are just incredibly punishing, and you don't have any way to normalize the results in a given game. Like, yes, of course, over 100 games, the results will normalize themselves, but it's just so risky you know, in a third of your games or whatever, if you low roll into some garbage, that is just an absolute disaster to have a card that is missing that often and doesn't really give you any options to recover, because it's so expensive at 4. And the high rolls probably aren't so like game winningly decisive that they're worth it for the low rolls that really punish you. So I just don't think this card is worth it for 4 mana. I think it's going to be clunky and awkward. Also, sometimes it's just going to be hard to get a good minion on board. Like, obviously, the higher the cost the minion, the more efficient this is going to feel, because you're spending that 4. So, you know, if you're getting like a free 9-drop out of it summoned, like, okay, that was worth it for 4. But if you're hitting totems or whatever, turning into 2-drops is clearly not going to feel worth it for 4 mana. So it's just awkward sometimes to get a big enough thing in play that's stuck for your matching outfits to connect. I just don't really see this card making much sense at all. So moving on here to Frosty Decor, nice new 5-mana frost spell. This one summons you 2/2/4 elementals with taunt and death rattle, gain 4 armor. And I think this just looks like a good solid defensive spell. Like, it's just doing a few different things. You know, sometimes that life gain can be pretty nice. Sometimes the bodies can be disruptive. The 2 attack on turn 5 is notably a little low. Like, these aren't going to take great trades. They'll leave behind, you know, a lot of boards when the opponent value trades into these sort of things. But I think it's serving that purpose as a stall card pretty well. It's like, hey, I just need a moment to breathe. I'm going to clean up with some AoE later, right? Like, I don't care if things get left behind on value trades. It just sets up my lightning storm or whatever it is. So I'm fine taking that kind of moment. I just need some time, and hopefully this gets me armor. The one downside with a card like this, where it doesn't give you the armor immediately, I think, is that, you know, if you're playing a deck with burn damage that's going over the top, they don't really care about your ice sculptures. They're just going to ignore those and fireball you to the face. So I think that's a limitation. If this just gave you the 8 armor and summoned 2/2/4s with taunt, I'd actually be much happier with this card, because I think sometimes just finding that armor gain immediately is really important. So this is one that does operate through the board a little bit more than through face, which can be a bit of a downside in modern day Hearthstone. That said, I think this will still find some defensive deck homes here and there. I think it's just kind of annoying enough for some decks to deal with to make the cut. And then our final Shaman card here is the Meltamental. This is a 3-mana 3/8 elemental. It's got taunt and it's permanently frozen, which the flavor of this card, I'm missing something here. It's in the sun, it's melting. Why is it permanently frozen? I feel like this card should say this is frozen for like 1 turn or something, or, you know, 2 turns, whatever it is. Like, I feel like it's very strange to me that it's permanently frozen and it's melting. So whatever the case, this is not a design and flavor conversation. This is a power level conversation. And this card's kind of intriguing. We've seen a few of these like more defensive top bodies try to get played in the past. I think it's actually okay. I think it's fine. I don't think it's great. Again, it's going to take a pretty specific deck list to care about this. And I don't actually know that it's elemental shamans. I think it's probably like a more defensive shaman or a Reno shaman that just needs something to slam down. I do think, though, that this is disruptive enough on turn 3 that it will be worth it in many instances. There's a lot of decks and boards that have, you know, the 1/1s and 2/2s and 3/3s floating around early that are going to have to slam into this. And the 8 health is enough, too, that it kind of dodges a lot of different kinds of removal. So I think it's just annoying enough to get there. The fact that it's permanently frozen is punishing, because you can't use this, you know, from a more aggressive standpoint. Like, if you've stabilized late, you can't use this to help finish off the opponent. You can't take cleaner trades into opponent's board. So there is some clunkiness around that, and that will limit it. It's not going to be a card we see often. But I think it's just big enough from both an attack standpoint, like cleaning up stuff that trades into it, and that health is meaty enough to survive and create some awkwardness. So I don't actually hate the Melt Elemental, other than maybe the flavor. Well, that said, let's rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Karis Cabaret Star is a 3-star card. Razzle Dazzler is a 4-star card. Siren Song is a 2-star card. Natural Talent is a 2-star card. Carefree Cookie is a 5-star card. Matching Outfits is a 2-star card. Frosty Decor is a 3-star card. Meltamental is a 3-star card. And yeah, there you go. That's it for the Shaman cards. Let me know what you think. Are these going to be any good in Shaman? Are they going to be any good in Death Knight? I didn't really talk about the the Evolve stuff much in Death Knight, because it doesn't really make sense. Frosty Decor could be the kind of thing you maybe see in a Death Knight. Melt Elemental, I doubt it. But anyway, all in all, kind of a mixed bag. I think Cookie looks nuts, but the rest is kind of shaky for Shaman. Not my favorite Shaman set here. But if you think these are going to be nuts, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.